Thank you very much. We'll now have a round of questioning by the members of the committee, and I will start with myself. We have 5 minutes as well. Mr. Wiseman, you've got a lot of history in corporate law. Give me a little primer on corporations and their involvement in politics and their ability to spend money. Have they always been able to spend money in politics? Is it unique to America? Different countries allow them to spend money in politics, and what's the growth or diminution of that?
Well, I think that the statement which was correctly read from Justice Scalia in his decision that the original text permits corporations to spend, the original text of the First Amendment permits corporations to spend money is inaccurate. I think Justice Stevens gave a much richer and more correct reading. The framers never intended corporations to spend money, and there was a lot of reason to think that they explicitly did not want them to. Justice Scalia's only argument really is that there was the lack of evidence, not that there was an affirmative evidence to enable corporations to spend money. In the early 19, as you do know, we do have a history of corporations spending money. It varies by state. In the original Gilded Age, we had corporations and the robber barons overwhelming elections and really running as party bosses. There were reforms put in place to curb that activity, and those reforms worked relatively effectively throughout much of the 20th century. Corporate spending itself really had not been given. There had been a series of restrictions on corporate spending, and the Supreme Court itself, in an important decision, Austin, had recognized that the unique nature of corporations, their unique ability to gather enormous sums, meant it made a lot of sense for the Congress or localities and states to have the ability to restrict corporate outside spending. That was thrown to the wind in Citizens United. And Mr. Smith is correct. We have not seen the torrents that were anticipated. We calculated about $500 million have been spent by corporations since the Citizens United decision was handed down, not a small amount, much of it in really significant ways. In local and state elections, as well as in referenda, we see corporations increasingly exerting an overwhelming effect with great harm. That's probably more than I could do to right now give you a cross-cultural story about it. But Citizens United really was a break from precedent, both historic, jurisprudential precedent, but also from the previous 100 years of American experience.
Do you have any, you expressed how much money has been put into campaigns through these super PACs since Citizens United, and how the $7 billion figure, I think might have been Deutsch mentioned, is distinguished from the 700 million figure, whatever, in the previous 20 years. Is there any data you have to show if that has affected Americans' belief that their government is not responsible to them?
In my written testimony, I have extensive information, and the polling on this is really overwhelming about Americans' deep concern with corruption. Asked by one pollster to rate 22 different attributes of American life, the campaign spending system comes in last. Only 20% of people are satisfied in that poll with the current campaign system. That actually is a pretty high number compared to other pollsters. The New York Times found that effective with near unanimity, their quote, Americans want to replace the current finance system. The only dispute among Americans they found was whether they believe that the current system needs fundamental change or should be completely rebuilt. It's hard to know which one is the more fundamental thing they're trying to get at. But we also see very deep concerns about corruption generally and dissatisfaction with American government, and really, I think, in fear, calls into question whether people believe in whether the government works for them. They're not wrong in being skeptical about that.
Let me ask you, I've only got a little time left. You said
Yes,
there are 25 top individuals. Can you give me the top 10 names?
Well, two of the two top names now are Sheldon Adelson and Michael Bloomberg. The top 10 I can't give you off the top of my head.
Thank you. Ms. Jayapal's bill is different from Mr. Deutsch's. Mr. Deutsch's strictly deals with campaign finance, and hers deals with other issues.
That's correct.
I can see a theory that corporations, it's kind of, and I hate to say it because I don't even like the word anymore, but a Dershowitz theory, that you know, if it's good for the corporation, then it's good for the stockholders, and they have a duty to see that the business goes further and whatever, for putting money into politics that might affect their businesses. But how can you say that a corporation can express a religious opinion That's not necessarily, like in Hobby Lobby. Is there any basis to think that a corporation should have a right? I mean, they're formed partially so they don't have to be responsible for liability. They're immune from liability. Why should they be able to have a right on what insurance is covered?
Well, I agree and support Representative Jayapal's bill. It seems extraordinary to me. But to be clear, that was what the Supreme Court held in Citizens United as well. The idea, and if you read the majority's decision, there's a lot of concern about discriminated against minorities not having the right to express their feelings, hopes, and aspirations. Now, the discriminated against minorities they were discussing in the majority decision are corporations. That's the set of people they thought were being discriminated against and wouldn't have their ability to express what they feel. As you say, they don't have feelings, as Justice Stevens expressed in great detail. They don't have feelings, they don't hurt, they don't care about the future, they care about profit. That was lost entirely in the Supreme Court's decision there, and as well in the Hobby Lobby cases and others.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Armstrong is sitting in as a ranking member, and I will recognize Mr. Armstrong now for 5 minutes.